Hey you guys, it's Professor Vic. I am here to give you guys some JFK conspiracy highlights because we're not going to have class today. So I wanted to get some of this information to you ahead of time so that you have a chance to absorb it. Please keep in mind, I will normally tell you when I am lying and when I'm not, but I won't do that this time. This time I'm just going to give you the presentation, and the reliance will be on you to separate what is true from what is false. So you've got to keep your eye out for fake news coming from me. So keep in mind, you should doubt everything I say, not just because I say it, but because in the end it will make it more likely that you have a larger number of true beliefs. Okay, so let's go through some JFK conspiracy highlights. I will go through the timeline the morning of the assassination on Wednesday. So let's just start moving. Okay, so these are just a few points I wanted to bring up that don't have individual slides concerning the assassination of JFK. First thing that conspirators usually point out, or conspiracy theorists point out, is that the gun that Oswald used was a POS, right? A piece of stuff. It was a really, really bad rifle. It cost him like $13. It was a World War II surplus weapon. Not very impressive. And people who've looked at the shot, right, I think it was 88 yards away, say there's just no way that gun could have done it, right? That gun couldn't have killed JFK. Secondly, and we'll look at this in class, the Zapruder film shows John F. Kennedy's head moves not from the back forward, but from the forward back. Now, remember, during the official story is that Lee Harvey Oswald is behind Kennedy, up in a building, and he shoots him from behind. So you would anticipate, obviously, the head to rock forward, but unfortunately, in this case, JFK's head rocks backwards, as shown in the Zapruder film. So that seems inconsistent with the official government story that JFK was shot from behind. Another point, witnesses who were there, so people who were actually present at the event, don't report gunshots coming from the building. Instead, they report gunshots coming from the grassy knoll, which would be in front of and to the side of President Kennedy. That strongly indicates that gunshots came from there. When you couple that with the fact that the Zapruder film clearly shows JFK's head moving back, and you combine that with the fact that the gun couldn't have shot JFK from behind, you're beginning to build a pretty strong case that the shot needed to come from somewhere else, right? Fourth, this is somewhat remarkable, the president's brain went missing. So in other words, of the pieces of evidence that were held in custody by the U.S. government, JFK's brain was present at one point, and then it disappears. If you are attempting to hide wounds, or the brain that you have in custody shows wounds that are inconsistent with the official story, you would need for that brain to disappear. Otherwise, the cover would be blown, right? So a number of people think not only is it strange that the president's brain went missing, but it's also highly indicative of a cover-up, right? Lastly, and this is something we'll talk about more in class, the FBI gets into a fight with the Dallas Police Department over Kennedy and all the evidence. What they want to do, what the feds want to do, is take Kennedy's body away from Dallas. They want to do the autopsy in Washington or Maryland. They do this, and in fact, the Secret Service removes JFK's body forcibly from Dallas. So there's a showdown between the Dallas coroner and Dallas sheriff, I believe, or state trooper, and the Secret Service. And the coroner says, you cannot take that body. This is a crime in Dallas, and by Dallas law, I have to do an autopsy on that body. And the Secret Service says, you are not doing an autopsy on this body, and we are taking it out of here before you can. The trooper apparently handles his gun, and the Secret Service do too. Eventually, the trooper decides to relent. I forget if it's a trooper or a sheriff, but he decides to let the Secret Service go. But for a moment there, gunfire almost erupted over the custody of the president's body. That indicates that the Secret Service or somebody really was pushing to get that body away and out of public eye before anyone could get too close of a look at it. Okay, so these are sort of rapid fire points. Next, I want to talk about Oswald himself. There's a great clip where Oswald himself is in custody and he admits he's a fall guy. He even says, "I'm just a patsy. I'm not the person who who did this." He says, "I'm just a patsy." And then, of course, this patsy is shot hours later by Jack Ruby, someone who has extensive contacts with the mob. So it's a little suspicious that when he's taken into custody, Lee Harvey Oswald says, you know, "I didn't kill the president. I'm just a patsy." And before he can explain what he means, he gets shot and killed by Jack Ruby right here. Another interesting fact about Oswald, he spent almost 3 years in the Soviet Union. So in 1959, he applies for asylum to the Soviet Union. It is not granted. They don't allow him in initially. As a result of this, Oswald attempts suicide. Maxie, can you close that door, buddy? Thank you, sweetheart. We're going to try and beat the jackhammers here today. Thank you, buddy. You're the best. Oswald attempts suicide. As a result of this, the Soviet Union relents and allows him to come into the country. And he stays there for a couple of years. He marries a Russian, Marina Oswald. Oswald has some ties to the Soviet Union. He has more, we'll see later. But that seems a little conspicuous, that the man who killed the president just spent 2 years abroad with our other major superpower, right? Next point. Domestically, at home, JFK was under fire from the CIA. And this was not entirely, but largely because of a failed invasion of Cuba. So the CIA had orchestrated an invasion to overthrow the communist government of Cuba, and it was called the Bay of Pigs. There was some question as to whether or not the president would authorize an airstrike to support this rebellious force. Kennedy doesn't order that strike. The invasion is unsuccessful, and it's a political nightmare for Kennedy. All along, it appears as though the CIA had thought Kennedy would order the extra airstrikes, and there appears to be some evidence that they might have given him a false picture. The idea that this strike really didn't, this invasion of Cuba didn't need additional air support, and that it was likely to be successful anyway. And when it wasn't, Kennedy felt that that was an omission, that it was an indication that he couldn't trust the CIA to tell him the truth. Rather, they had their own agenda. This made JFK very, very suspicious of the CIA, and the thinking was that he was planning on, in some way, either dismantling it or restructuring it in such a way that it would not resemble anything that it was. Of course, this gives the CIA some reason or some motivation to attack the president, right? If institutionally they are at risk, then they will lash back, right? They will lash back, fight back and lash out at the president. Okay, next thing, domestically, JFK was also under fire from the mob. If you look at conviction rates under the Attorney General that JFK appointed, which is his brother Bobby, so you can see Bobby right here, and you can see JFK right there. Hold on just a moment. Okay, all right, so let's just get back to it here. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General for JFK. So at the time, this raised some fuss because the president was sort of appointing his brother to be the Attorney General, and it was kind of seen maybe as nepotism or, just giving your brother a job. Turns out RFK was excellent at the job. Bobby Kennedy, right here, his younger brother, was tenacious. And every single project that Bobby Kennedy was involved in became a personal grudge. And here he has, here we have a picture of Mr. Giancana, who was the head of organized crime at the time. And there's an exchange between Giancana and Robert Kennedy I just want to read it for you and give you some idea what we're dealing with. So this is Bobby Kennedy. Would you tell us anything about any of your operations, or will you just giggle every time I ask you a question? And then the mob boss, Mr. Giancana, says, I decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me. And Mr. Kennedy said, I thought only little girls giggled, Mr. Giancana. And then he mad dogs him, like he's going to come over the table at him, right? Something like that. Bobby Kennedy, from the point at which he was installed as Attorney General, the conviction rate and the prosecution, I forget, it might be the conviction rate for crimes involving the mafia, their conviction rate went up 800% under Bobby Kennedy. In other words, when JFK hired Bobby Kennedy, he told him, look, go after the mob. And Bobby Kennedy was going after the mob in a big, big way. And if JFK was out of the way, that would remove a great deal of heat from the mob. So again, you can see now domestically, right? The CIA had reason to fear the dissolution of their organization because of JFK, and the mob were also in that same position, right? It's sort of an us or them position, it looks like. And Bobby Kennedy himself was so combative, they knew that the only way that they could get him to back off would be to knock out the president, right? That might give him some pause. By the way, Bobby Kennedy was himself also assassinated. Okay, another important point about JFK and his medical examination. The first doctor who looks at him, Dr. Malcolm Perry at Parkland Hospital, was asked at a press conference immediately after he had worked on President Kennedy. He was asked, where was the entrance wound? And Dr. Perry says, there was an entrance wound in the neck. As regards the one on the head, I cannot say. He also points out that it's important to note here that the entrance wound was in the neck, which means there's a shot here that Kennedy gets, and as we look at this in class, you'll see. When Kennedy is first shot, his hands reach up to his throat. According to the official story of the government, this comes from behind, right? That this bullet must come from behind because Lee Harvey Oswald shoots President Kennedy from behind. The medical examiner says, oh, no, the entrance wound was from the front. Well, if that's true, and again, that's very good eyewitness testimony. It's the day that the president was shot. Someone says, yeah, the entrance wound was in the neck. That's very good evidence and strongly suggests, when you combine it with the evidence from the Zapruder film that the president's head moves back and eyewitness testimony that says the shots came from the front, right? And now he's shot in the front of the neck. It strongly indicates, right? We have qualified expert testimony that the president was shot from the front. And if he was, then there had to be a conspirator. There had to be a conspiracy to kill the president. Also, to make matters even stranger, Lee Harvey Oswald makes a trip to Mexico City weeks before the assassination, and he meets with the Russians and the Cubans. Now, it turns out that the CIA might have kept back quite a bit of information that they had concerning these meetings. It looks as though, and this is a letter that was not released until later, it looks as though Castro or Castro's principals had exchanges with Oswald because pertaining to granting him a visa. So here we have a letter. This has been declassified, and it says, according to our source, Castro recently is reported to have said, our people in Mexico gave us the details in a full report on how Oswald noted when he came to Mexico to their embassy. First of all, nobody ever goes that way for a visa. Second, it costs money to go that distance. Oswald stormed into the embassy, demanded the visa, and when it was refused, he said, I'm going to kill Kennedy for this. That's pretty explosive testimony. It indicates that contrary to what the official story is, right? The official story is Oswald was just a crazy lone nut and he shot Kennedy with virtually no planning. This letter again, kept from the Warren Commission, kept from the government agency that was supposed to investigate the crime. This letter indicates that Oswald was actively seeking a visa to Cuba or Russia in exchange for assassination of the president. So, let's see, I think that's all of us. No, the questions surrounding John F. Kennedy's assassination were so great in the public that in 1976, Congress started an independent investigation of the matter, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They looked at 2 assassinations, Martin Luther King's, I believe, and John F. Kennedy's. They established by a high probability that JFK was shot by 2 people. We'll talk about this in greater detail, but they used something called dictabelt findings. So there was essentially a recorder, a policeman's, a motorcycle policeman's radio is left on. While this is left on, the shooting takes place. And so, although there is no video evidence, there appears to be some pretty good acoustic evidence that there were multiple shots fired, more than those that the government claimed in its official report. So this is directly from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Summary of findings. Scientific acoustical evidence establishes a high probability that 2 gunmen fired at President John F. Kennedy. Other scientific evidence doesn't preclude the possibility of 2 gunmen firing at the president, but scientific evidence negates some specific conspiracy allegations. So they were able to knock out some actors, they felt, but they did find that there was a high probability of 2 shooters. The committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that JFK was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee is unable to identify the other gunmen or the extent of the conspiracy. That's huge. The United States government, right, 13 years after this event occurred, was asked to look into it again. They do, and they find that the official report, the Warren Commission, is incorrect, and there was probably a conspiracy to kill the president. So I mentioned in class, this isn't really a conspiracy theory. I don't really need to do anything to soup up JFK to look like a conspiracy case. It looks like a conspiracy case, right? And we know this stuff actually happened. Let's see if we're done. Oh, one last point. Dallas itself was hostile to JFK. A day before he arrives, there were a number of these pamphlets. I think it was a couple of days before he arrived. These pamphlets were circulated on the street, wanted for treason. And this was another American group that was concerned that he was too friendly with communists. So JFK was heading into a dangerous situation. The CIA had reason to assassinate him. The mob did. Local political insurgents did. And Russia and Cuba also might have too. So you have lots and lots of people who have lots and lots of incentive to take out the president. The question is, are you going to be able to figure out which one of them it was in this class module? On Wednesday, we will start the JFK assassination timeline. I'm going to hand out to you guys a flyer that I've finished that will help us keep track of all the details of all the names. Remember, I haven't actually run through the timeline with you yet, so you're still not sure on the exact sequence of events, but I wanted to front load some of the more obvious facts that relate to conspiracy, because I think it will help you as we move through this module to keep those things in mind. Okay, you guys, I hope it's super helpful, and I'm so sorry we didn't have class today. This will help us to make up some ground, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday.